Hey everyone. Hey Dustin.
Hello, sir.
And thanks so much for making time again to connect. I'm super excited to chat with you this week. We have a cool topic. We're actually gonna, in a roundabout way, I think, talk about fear, um, but approaching it through the lens of a question. And when we encounter like a barrier or a difficulty in life or something we don't want to fully show up for, or something we do want to show up for, we just don't find ourselves doing that. The question is, what's on the other side of that experience, that task, that habit, um, that thing that that we feel hesitation around stepping into? So, really excited to dive into that topic today with you. And yeah,
Heck yeah, man. That's a wonderful intro. Jeez, that's fantastic. Um, yeah, it's a topic I'm very excited about, and I know we're both excited about is in my human experience, fear is, I believe, the biggest, as the movie Dune says, fear is the mind killer. Fear of all the
yeah,
negative or uncomfortable emotions. For me, it's fear has been the most debilitating thing in my life that I've made leaps and bounds in understanding and embracing and facing and then all like the question you open up the podcast with, all the stuff on the other side is gold,
hmm.
beyond gold. And so yeah, what about you? What do you have to say about that before I do a deep dive on something?
Yeah, great question. The question came up for me earlier this week, speaking with a newer mentor in my life who's just brought it up as a really neat way to ponder, to reflect, to even show curiosity in our own lives around something that we may not have clarity around. And what I mean by that is we might have a goal. Like for me in particular, um, I've had a goal for this last year of being more present on social media and being more open about what's going on in my life, and really out of a desire to just create and connect with community. Um, However, I really haven't done that. It's been something that's been on my calendar. It's been on my to-do list. It's been in the back of my mind. It's been in my thoughts at night when I'm not sleeping. And yet I don't find myself doing the activity. I don't find myself stepping into it. And so that's kind of the framework with where this question came up
Mm,
from her. It was just suggesting I sit with that and ponder what's on the other side of doing that for me. Um, and and I think one way it's so cool, and we were chatting about this earlier, is that it's a question that really comes out of curiosity. It comes out of interest in yourself, interest in and how you can progress and how you can move forward. Um, and it negates and gets around a lot of the judgment and blame that we often
mm-hmm,
uh, initiate our introspection with, that we initiate our questions to ourselves, often with judgment first. Like we've already put ourselves in a space, labeled it. Um,
mm,
I'm lazy. I don't get what I want done. I don't follow through on tasks. Um, I'm a liar because
mm,
I said I would do this a year ago and I haven't done it. Like whatever else
mm,
uh, we can show up with, and all of those labels immediately cloud our vision. I think obscure actually seeing what really is there, and take us out of a place of power to do anything about it. Because you're basically just claiming being broken from the start.
mm.
So I think this is it's a really fun uh, and, for the context, relatively light way of approaching a difficulty or struggle in life, and uh, seeing if you can get some clarity on what is on the other side, and just by the act of knowing it and sitting with it, I think it's a great opportunity to see those monsters that we may have created in our head on the other side of that event, see what they really are, and maybe they're not near as big as
Mm.
we thought they were.
Yeah, like we see that scary shadow
Hmm.
on the wall that looks like this monster that's 20 feet tall with fangs coming out and dripping just monstrous, saliva and poison, and we look to our right and it's a it's a puppy with a light behind it being shined up on the wall, and you're like, wait a minute, wait, what happened here? The puppy's like, hey. um
Yeah.
yeah, so I'm really curious if you want to share, for you, what is behind that.
Hmm. Great question. Um, it's something that I'm still spending time with. I'm still sitting with. But what's come up so far really has been fear. Um, that's what kind of teased that in our intro. And I think a lot of things often are hesitations. Often behind that, at the root of that, ends up being fear. But for me, I think it's fear of letting people down, fear of um, not impressing people or not
Mm,
living up to a standard that someone else might have. Um,
yeah.
and I think what's been so neat about that awareness is realizing I can't change anything about how other people perceive me. Like I know that, like how uh, it doesn't matter how close that person is, even your and I relationship. Like I don't have agency to change how you feel or think about me, but I do have agency to change my parameters for how I show up. And so I think it's really let me see that there's some self-worth uh, stuff going on there that I wasn't aware of, that there's an aspect of my worth or my value that I'm placing outside of myself and letting this unnamed audience, again, because I don't even like, I don't even
Yeah.
know who these people are that I'm worried about, like what they're gonna think of me. Um,
It's
these
an
these
invisible
fake,
army of judgers.
yeah, nameless, faceless, and
Yeah.
obviously, like the more you
Yeah.
actually step out and
That's funny.
and be yourself, those people will show up and have faces and stuff, but it still doesn't matter. Um,
Mm.
I'm
It
still
doesn't
the
have to.
only,
Yeah.
doesn't have to, absolutely.
Yeah. It might,
Um,
but
they only have the agency we give them,
mm,
to speak into our lives. And so I think that was a really neat awareness, and continues to be, that yes, it was fear, but that fear let let me know that that I'm still not finding my total value and internally, that I'm still placing aspects of that
mm,
outside of me. And um I'm laughing because I'm really excited to be in a place in my life that I'm excited to find these things out, that I see
mm.
this as an opportunity and not so many years of my life. I
Yeah.
think that it's just would have been another thing that just bummed me out. It was like, great, now I've got that issue too. And it's like, well,
Ah,
I just see this so
yep.
differently now. It's like, ooh, I've
Mm,
always had that issue, and I'm actively
mm,
moving away from that and changing and transforming into um, someone who does value myself, someone who does uh, seek first, like to know that I'm aligned and I'm congruent on how I feel, and
mhm.
just grateful for the reactions that happen, because those are out of my control. I don't know if
Dude.
that totally answers
Mm.
your question, but that's where my head went.
Yeah, I mean that's that I didn't have any intention of an answer I
Mm,
was expecting, because this was such an organic topic we chose,
yeah,
and it was inspired from something that you brought up, and so I was just curious to see what's behind the fear. So many depends on how is it the lesson? Is it more
yeah,
fear? It could be a bunch of different things. So um I just loved your answer because it was so authentic, and I just felt so nourished in hearing you open up and share that. So that was
yeah.
cool.
I appreciate
Um,
that.
very, very relatable. from my human experience. Yeah, like, man, mine, like, fear has played, I've had an interesting relationship with fear. Some people that I've spoken to over the years who know me well,
Mm.
been like, you don't seem like a fearful person at all, right? And it's like, I'm like, well, what do you mean? And you're like, just the adventures, the living in other countries, the travel, the leaving a career that's stable and going to something else, you know, um, using my voice, going on a podcast, and all the different things I've done. And it's like, it taught me how fear is such a shapeshifter, and where
Mm.
we might see someone and think, oh, they don't have any fear. And then we get to know them and they're like, yeah, they do. It just shows up in different ways. They
Mm-hmm.
fear different things. Things that
Mm-hmm.
scare me, you might be really good at, um, and love doing. And so, yeah, man, for me, I mean, this year I faced a lot of fear. And so if I answer that fear, what's on the other side? To me, it's like pure gold. Fear
Mm.
is the other side of fear is growth. The other side of fear is opportunity. The other side of fear is joy. The other side of fear is confidence. The other side of fear is human connection,
Mm.
dreams. And also to what you're saying, the other side of fear can be nightmares,
Mm.
invisible judgy armies, and all this stuff that our mind makes up. And so to me, it's like on the other side of fear, before it's faced,
Mm.
I think is just full. It's just fear breeds fear. Like, what was that famous quote? Only thing to fear is fear itself, or
For
something. I
yourself,
forget
yeah.
who said that. Do you know who said that? It was like a
Multiple different
president.
people, but I'm not sure the original one.
No,
Yeah, it
no,
seems like a
no.
World War
Sure.
II
Yeah,
reference.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah. Like everyone says that now, but so I think that's the interesting thing about fear is and this is something that I've learned a lot. Like for me, if I look at like, okay, stage one.
Mm.
So I'm going to say how I've experienced fear and the things I've learned that have um, evolved me into who I am today, um, and just my passion and working deeply with people emotionally and spiritually and mentally and all these things is like stage one. It's like all of a sudden you have the thought or the feeling,
Mm.
right? And for me, okay, I'll use the example of this year. It's just, very fresh. It's the podcast. I'll talk about this podcast. This is perfect. Um, is my fear was sometimes still is actually. So it's not like it's completely gone. Just keep facing it, and I keep
Mm-hmm.
like withering and chiseling away that fear until it's just going to get smaller and smaller and smaller. And eventually, it might even be gone completely. Who knows? But to me, is this fear of like, okay, I've built myself into this character I believe myself to be, and how the world views me.
Mm-hmm.
And now this relationship, ended, and open on social media and podcasts. Like we really want to share our voices and our opinions. And my fear was, I don't have all. Like I'm in a very transitional state,
Mm.
and if I get in a podcast and I start sharing my real thoughts and feelings and perspectives, like I am gonna destroy connections. I'm gonna destroy my ability to be an effective coach or guide or mentor to people. And it was almost debilitating, dude. Like
Mm.
it was very scary. It was very, very scary. So phase one is like my mind just going bananas on it. And then all the emotion, like the emotion of fear that we feel in the body. Um, and so that cycle happens. And then what is so helpful to me is where emotions come up, the seven that we've talked about, of my five senses, the thoughts of my mind, and the feelings of my heart. And especially for fear, fear to me is the most uncomfortable difficult negative emotion to engage with.
Yeah.
Sadness, easy. um, Anger, different beast, way easier. Fear is the biggest one. It's a whole different thing for me. And so when I engage with, when fear comes up, I go to the 7, make this my practice as much as I can of, I am not this fear. The fear is happening. It's real. But most of the time is not true.
Mm.
And that took me a very long time to understand. I used to make true and real unconsciously synonymous in my mind often. It's like, it's real in my mind, but it's not true. Therefore, most certainly it's not going to be real in the 3-dimensional world. And so for me, this, again, invisible army of judges of, people are going to reject me. People are going to judge me. People are going to, there could be shame. There could be guilt, all that stuff. And it was like, huh, that's interesting. And so, like you're saying, because of where we are in our lives, where I've come to, instead of just withering away with that and letting it remove and stop this beautiful thing from ever being created.
Yeah.
One night I just got on and I messaged you. I'm like, Joe, I'm doing it. And I just set us up on Spotify and so here we are on this podcast.
Mm.
And except for a couple speed bumps that I went through, which I shared about, it's been the opposite. And it's like, that is so a phenomenon for me in this human experience I've seen from, greats in different industries, right? Where they had like comfort zone and then an arrow outside, and that's where all the magic happens. A lot of people have probably seen that. And it's just hilarious how true it is. So for me, it's like phase 1, it comes up. How am I going to engage with that? Am I going to be realizing it's not who I am? It's not me. I'm the consciousness witnessing it. And then, oh, okay, like, do I even know if that's real or true? I don't know it's true. It might come true, but then checking in with my gut, my intuition. Does this feel, fear or not fear? Does this feel like my soul, like me as a soul is like drawn to this? Cool. I'll face the fear. Totally fine. Because I feel that congruency. So then I face it. And then that's courage, right? You'll have courage without fear. And so then, cool, I'm building my muscle of courage. I'm building my continued muscle of awareness of what I am and what I'm not. And then I get to do new things, grow, create, share. You and I have this beautiful energy in this podcast that we get to share with people. It's so, oh my God, I'm so grateful. And so then, yeah, like there was initially some stuff that was on the other side in my mind. But then what became real on the other side, 8% of it is human connection, gratitude, awesome discussions, people being inspired, me being inspired, you've been inspired. I've grown, you've grown, people have grown, the feedback we've gotten. And it's like, wow, like fear is such a sneaky little bugger. And it tries to catch you right at the start. Like, well, wait. Like this beautiful dream can start manifesting. And fear's like, wait a minute. And you can try to sneak in the back door right before something beautiful grows, right before the seed starts to come out of the shell. And so for me, that's my experience with fear. And of course, I still slip and fall, and sometimes I'll give fear a little more time than it deserves. But for the most part, like what you said, my muscle of getting quicker and quicker back to, oh, cool, this is a learning opportunity. Oh, cool. We were just sharing from Tony Robbins. Most of our people's biggest problem is thinking they shouldn't have any.
Yeah.
And you've inspired me a lot in this as well. There's, especially in the Tony Robbins weekend with you, you have built a cool muscle in ways where like we're both building this muscle, and I almost like if like the muscle is like our bicep of facing fear, and I'm like, ooh, you're kind of more chiseled on that little curve right there. Cool, you're inspiring me. Thank you, like for showing up that way.
Great
And then
visual.
it teaches me, right? Like your fear, your courage bicep, I guess. Um, and that's a beautiful thing, man. Like
Yeah.
it's like we're flipping one of the most horrible, uncomfortable, toxic things in life on its head and being like, thank you, cool. Let's see what comes next. I'm
Mm.
gonna show up.
Oh, I love that response. Yeah, thank you for sharing about your life as well in that way and just how you've encountered it. Um, I really liked your kind of explanation of the different phases of that process of becoming aware of the thing, sitting with a thing, the thing being whatever's on the other side. Um,
Mm.
in most cases, as we're discovering, it's often fear, or at its root, it's fear. Um, and it is so interesting how those phases shift because it's so big and scary initially, and then
Yeah.
when you choose to sit with it and choose to see it and be curious about it, not judge it, um, it does get smaller. It really calms. It allows you, as you said, to reflect back on: is this still something I want to do? Is this something I feel called to? Is this align with what I'm about?
Mm.
Um, and then that can give us the courage to then step into it. And then that wild
Well
thing
said.
happens, as you said, and then it's completely different. So often, even that diminished sense of what we thought was going to be over there, that's not there at all. Like it's
Mm.
wonder, it's connection, it's development, it's joy, it's laughter, and not saying there can't be actual bumps on the other side, but they're always so different than I thought they were going to be. And I think what's also wild in that is every time I have crossed that line, when I have stepped into that fear, when I have practiced courage, the the barriers that come up or the items that I have to deal with, I'm so capable of dealing with and I grow
Mm.
from. And I think that's been shocking to me. Because the whole, for me anyway, where fear typically starts is you don't know what you're doing. You're not enough for what might be over there. You
Mm.
don't have
Mm.
the experience. You don't have the connection. You don't, whatever it is, it's something typically lack mindset or
Yeah.
something that I'm not enough of.
Mm.
And I think that's been one of the joys of actually stepping into courage is getting over there and actually like, oh, I can deal with this. Whatever it is. And just that reinforcement of being enough, being worthy, being whole,
Mm.
and the funny, silly aspect that we have to go through fear to see that
Mm.
we don't
Mm.
get to just see those parts of ourselves without stepping into the fear, without practicing courage. Um, yeah, it's such a funny conundrum, and I
Yeah.
love what you brought up about what Tony Robbins said about a lot of people's biggest fear, or not biggest fear, biggest
Biggest
problem is
problem.
thinking they shouldn't have problems. But I really think that connects really well with fear too.
Oh, yeah.
I think for me, and I've noticed this in people I've worked with as well, like we're so judgmental towards ourselves when we have fear. And yet, as I step back, it's ridiculous to think that we wouldn't have fear. Like
Yeah.
there's no
Mm.
part of my life that I've wanted or been excited about that didn't have some element of fear connected to it. Um, and I think like it's so broken to think that I'm broken because there's fear there. Like it's just one of the ingredients of our life and how we how we choose to use it, um, to deal with
Mm.
it, to hold it is such a determiner on how we enjoy life, our connection, whether we view it through a lens of opportunity or oppression, and
Mm.
just what a subtle shift that is, but profound in its implications for How will we live?
Dude, totally. That I love I love everything you just said. I agree with all of it. It makes me think of, and I didn't learn this probably until, I don't know, last five years or 10 years. I just never thought about it. And it
Hmm.
was a post or somebody was, I don't know. I don't know who said it or where I read it or saw a video or something, but it was the, we, I'm sure anyone listening to this, we've heard about the very um, commonly talked about catharsis of a butterfly. But the interesting thing I learned is that there's like a story where somebody saw the caterpillar and they saw the butterfly trying to come out and struggling, and they helped it,
Hmm.
and the butterfly died. And
Hmm.
what happened is, and then I learned this part of what happens when the caterpillar evolves and has to struggle um to get through to get out of the cocoon and get out to actually be able to fly. If you help it, it doesn't squeeze all the liquid out, and it literally will die and won't be able to fly. Like, it has to face the fear of going through the pain and
Hmm.
going to the out of the cocoon. It literally needs, like, it's not like a reframe. It needs that process.
Yeah.
And it's like, to me, the same principle of fear of what we're talking about is, okay, imagine if we didn't have, okay, if I imagine if I didn't have any fear. Well, that's interesting. I might walk off a cliff.
Hmm.
I might, the go 200 miles an hour and drive all these. So there was a book called The Gift of Fear. Have you heard of that
Oh,
book?
I haven't. Uh-uh.
Oh, it's fascinating, man. I read this a long time ago. Um, and it's a former, I think, FBI agent. And this has been an interesting thing that I've talked about in recent years a lot is um, negative emotions. Are they really negative?
Hmm.
How do we define that? And versus intuition, versus inner knowing. And this FBI agent basically talks about the gift of fear being connected to intuition and gut instinct as a gift that helps
Hmm.
us to survive and avoid harmful situations. And so that's like the other side of it is like, is this fear something like, okay, I've walked into a room or a dark alley. A dark alley is a better example. And all of a sudden I have fear, but it's directly connected to intuition. It's like that instinct. It's
Hmm.
almost instinct.
Hmm.
That's very different than me lying in bed thinking about doing a podcast with you and being afraid to share my voice with the world
Yeah.
and what I'm going through.
Hmm.
Very, very different. That's just mind fear that has no basis in reality versus instinctual, like, fear of avoiding a saber-toothed tiger or something like that. And there's a lot of nuances there. That that's a whole nother conversation. I think we could probably do another whole other podcast on. But to me, that's interesting because it gets to the question, when we feel negative emotions or when we make a choice on something, did we do that because it was intuition, or did we do that because it was instinct? And in those two, my sister and I talked about this once, about the nuances of, like, a negative emotion versus instinct versus fear, or sorry, versus intuition.
Hmm.
And so I, looking back, can say for myself, I used to say, like, oh, it's just my intuition. It's my intuition. And then as I evolved more, I'd be like, well, sometimes that wasn't intuition. Sometimes that was just fear.
Hmm.
Um, because then it would, like, what I thought happened, like, turned out to, it wasn't as this spiritually semi-enlightened accuracy that I thought I had achieved in that decision-making process. And I'm like, That's humbling.
Yeah.
So that to me is a very interesting piece of all this. I
Mm.
think the the more grounded and centered we get in ourselves, the more we get to know ourselves. And I love meditation for this piece. Um, it starts to separate those things. So again, that distance, and then like, what is my system telling me? Is this coming from my mind? Is this coming from my heart? Is this like instinct? Is this intuition? Um, they're very different things, and so I think it's a fascinating thing to talk about. Um, but I wanted to ask you a question. I mean, feel free to
Yeah.
just respond to that. I do want to pose a question to you as well. I was thinking earlier, is me knowing your backstory and knowing you today. I think you knowing my backstory, knowing me today, we have evolved quite a bit
Mm.
from the young men we were, or
Sure.
the young boys. And on this topic of fear, uh, do you remember, like, if I'm like, okay, old Joe or young Joe is like stuck in fear and this shame and this judgment and this I'm not enough or all those things, and then current Joe and facing fear. Was there a moment? Do you remember a moment where it shifted, or was it gradual, or how do you remember the biggest shifts in your growth and evolution in the topic of facing fear?
That's a really good, really big question.
You know, I love those.
Yeah, you really do.
I
No,
love
thank you.
them.
I
Yeah,
was like, man, that encompasses a lot. Not surprised.
yeah,
It just it encompasses a lot.
yeah.
Let me
Oh,
wrap
that
my head
was
around
funny.
that. Yeah, so what I heard as far as your question was interested in the historical progression of dealing with fear. Like, was there big changes, or was it a gradual thing? Like, kind of what that process was for me. Is that what you were?
Yeah, I think some of the highlights are some of the key moments where you can remember the shift in your
Oh.
experience with fear took place.
Mm-hmm. No, it's a great question. So, what's coming up right now is that it definitely has been gradual.
Hmm.
I mean, I think back to being 13, um, and so much of my life like was dictated by how I felt about how I looked. Early, like um, going through puberty, starting to be interested in sexual partner, fascinated by that whole new world that was opening up, and at the same time felt incredibly crippled by this shell that I was given and born into at that time.
Hmm.
I was convinced I just ridiculously ugly, and probably by certain accounts I might have been. But the the fear that gave me in showing up for relationships and not being my true self, not trying to manipulate and dictate how people experienced me because of that. Uh, I remember specifically one thing there that I had so much judgment around, um, was my nose. And I was just like, this, I don't think I'll ever be able to overcome what I was born with, and nobody will love me. And I think like there was a lot of judgment stuff going on, but the root of it was fear. The root of it was being accepted. And that didn't shift for me until probably early 20s. And I think there really was a big shift. So I can jump into what that shift was, but so I feel like it's been gradual, but there's been big moments along the way that there were large shifts. Um, and that I think that was one of them. There was I had a pretty significant medical experience, late teens, early 20s. It's really was life threatening, and I think because of that, like it helped me give me an immense amount of perspective on how much our physical appearance um, doesn't really play into like why we're here and what we're about and the connections that we make. Um, and just showed I think it showed me a much deeper level that humans participate on outside of um, that kind of surfacey, like this is looks based or the sound of my voice or whatever. Not that um, those aren't legitimate fears to be faced, but just experiencing that life or death kind of encounter reframed a lot of that for me. And I think that was one of my first big shifts in overcoming fear, was just realizing that there was so much more um, to life than I thought it was. It was kind of a paradigm shift or a perspective shift. Um, and so I think that there was a whole level of fear in my life that just disappeared with that experience. Um, you obviously go on to say that there's been an immense amount of other fears that I've encountered in the journey like since then. But I think the story has been similar. Like there's been incremental growth, and then there'll be these pivotal experiences, relationships, a breakup, falling in love, losing a loved one, like just different things. And those are things I'm reflecting on back in my life that I felt like each of them individually dramatically changed like the scope which I experienced fear, processed it, and step into it. So yeah, both I guess would be my answer. Um, and ongoing. And I think this is one of the neat things that we both alluded to in this, is I don't think the fear is going away. Like it changes, it shifts where it comes up for me, changes and shifts, and my process around it continues to evolve. But I think it's a reality of growth. It's a reality of being here. Um,
Yeah.
I don't know that we can have desires or aspirations or dreams without there being a component of fear in that.
Yeah.
I don't because I don't anything that we're genuinely connected to, genuinely desirous of. There's there's going to be that friction around, and as you said before, I mean, I loved your referring back to the example of the caterpillar and the butterfly. Like so many of these things simply have to be gone through to actually experience the thing we wanted to experience on the other side. Like it's not even, we can't even step into the being a butterfly without that fear, without that pain, without that friction.
Mm-hmm.
We don't get there without it.
Mm-hmm. I like that's a great answer, man. Yeah, it's the thought that comes up for me right now is something that I've deeper layers of the onion of awareness
Mm,
and consciousness and growth and different muscles we build, figuratively or literally or whatever, is I used to view fear like a dangerous enemy.
mm,
And that was interesting. When I was a kid, I didn't really have any fear. I don't know if that's I mean, I think it can be common in kids, I guess,
mm-hmm.
based on the personality, but I was a pretty fearless kid. I didn't really have a lot of fear until I started getting bullied in high school. And I faced there's a whole new kind of fear there.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, my physical life threatened
Mm,
on a daily basis for the first half of my freshman year in high school, um, often in front of the entire class of boys and girls. It was not fun at all. But that's like kind of gets into we're not born with we're not born with fear in a sense of this monster that we need to keep running from. And so now I view it instead of as this dangerous villain who's coming to attack me and I need to just run from or hide from or all these things or uh, build some extravagant attempt to subvert or
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
avoid is kind of like with the little cub and like the monster. It's like I shine a light and it's like, oh, you're my friend.
Yeah.
that's coming to ask me to go on this adventure, or you're a friend that is bringing a problem that I can help solve, or you're a friend that is um, picking me up to go do, like, you don't have to be an enemy
Mm-hmm.
because you're not.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like viewing it as a friend that creates uncomfortable experiences for me. But then when I think about what happens after that experience was had, I'm so grateful that I did the thing.
Yeah.
And I like what you said, is it's not even a reframe. It's not even this, like, it's it just is. It's
Mm.
inevitably a part. It's an ingredient. It's like the fear is like the flour in chocolate chip cookies. Like, you don't get the cookies unless you, like, it's not even like, how do I take the flour? Like, well, you're not gonna get a cookie then. Like, it's gonna be a different thing. Uh and just continuing to
Mm.
live from that perspective, and
Mm.
life for me continues to get better and better and better when I do that. And so it's yeah.
Oh, that's really good.
Oh.
I really appreciate that answer. I think that it reminds me of, maybe I've said this in part already, but just seeing it as one of the ingredients, seeing it as it is going to be here. How do I show up for this differently? How do I welcome this differently? Um, and I think one of those pivotal changes that happened for me regarding fear along the way is not seeing myself as broken for having it. I think that was I don't know how common that is, but I had a huge theme of just in my life of just feeling broken, and the ammunition that I often used for that in my head was fear, doubt, guilt, things that came up. Um, and through my growth, I've been so grateful to realize like that those are just components along the journey. Those are flags, awarenesses of things that are coming up that I can step into, that I can shift,
Mhm.
and that I can know other by stepping into that. And I think that's the whole courage piece. We've said it again and again, even just in this podcast, but
Mhm.
you can't practice or experience courage without fear. And so that's something like you can't ever know how courageous you are until you step into the fear you have. And that's something I'm so grateful to be in this part of my journey and be able to reflect back on that, see that, and use those experiences in my life right now and moving forward. And they
Mhm.
do help frame um, the pattern with how I show up for fear now. And I
Mhm.
just think that's something that I don't know that as humans we uh, we have gratitude for the experiences in our life that teach us stuff. I think that's been in both of our lives. That's been a
Mhm.
massive agent for reshaping, changing the energy around struggle. Is after you're through it, taking time to look back, reflect, and be grateful for those lessons. To look back to see
Yeah.
that thing there was a fucking monster in your life, and look back and be like, I am so grateful. I would never be right here right now
Yeah.
without that fucking monster. Had I not faced that, had I not stepped into that, I would not be the person I am today. I wouldn't have the relationships, wouldn't have the opportunity, wouldn't have the
Yeah.
assets. And I think that just there's an immense power in that reflection, in that gratitude. Um, and it's amazing the hardships that we can be grateful for um, when we sit with it. I think that I never would have believed that 15 years ago, that I would be grateful for so many things in my life, that I was just like, I would dream about a life without these things. And I just didn't realize like that's not a life I want. Like, because back to the butterfly story, like I never would have had a chance of like becoming the butterfly, for lack of a better word,
Mm,
without that struggle. It's not
mm.
an option. Um,
Dude,
uh,
totally. Totally.
how's that come up for you?
Um, Several things. One, Jordan Peterson, something he talks about.
Hmm.
Another one is the it's something that I learned in reading books from um forget what the book was called, but people on their deathbed.
Okay.
And essentially it's like the trauma, the accident, the heartbreak, the disease, the diagnosis, the problem, the struggle, the painful thing. Often, it depends on how we face it, is people say the best thing that ever happened to me.
Hmm.
And in
Hmm.
my journey with leukemia,
Hmm.
you said 15 years ago, that was diagnosed, what, 13 years ago?
Hmm.
Uh, I had the same, like, it was like, everyone's like, I'm like, no, this is horrible.
Hmm.
Like, what do you make, it's like, what are you talking about? Like, how is this a good thing? you know? And it is now, I've said this a lot. It is one of the best things that has ever happened to me. There's
Hmm.
no way
Hmm.
I would be the man I am today without that.
Yeah.
And that forced me,
Hmm.
doesn't force everyone. There's a story about twins, which I'll say in a second, but on that point, it's like it forced me to not have a plan B for the majority of my life since that diagnosis. I
Hmm.
tripped, I fell, that's for sure. The most of the time, though, no plan B. I must get better. I must grow. I must face this fear. I must evolve through this emotional toxic waste I'm living in. I must figure out a way to have the thoughts of my mind not be identified with them, and not have that rule my world. I must be able to get my physical health right. I must be able to get energy. I must be able to not be sick all the time. Like there's got to be a way.
Hell yeah.
And so that problem, that fear, that struggle, um, continues to be one of the best things in my life. And
Hmm.
so, um, you know, there's
Hmm.
that part. And I want to say a story before I say the Jordan Peterson thing, because the story is, and I think Tony Robbins. No, I don't know where I got this from. Actually, maybe him. But twin brothers raised in the same household with a very abusive father.
Hmm.
And uh, they grow up, one son, healthy family, um, financially secure, good man. The other son is in and out of jail, angry, bitter, uh, addicted, to drugs off and on, no family, living a pretty crappy life.
Hmm.
And they're interviewed, and someone asks the brother that's just had a horrible life, like, why do you think you've had this life? And the guy's like, dude, my upbringing. Look at my dad. I mean, with that kind of upbringing, are you kidding me? How could I not
Hmm.
have a life like this? And they asked the other brother, and why he has the life he has. And he's like, man, the way I was raised, with an upbringing like that, how could you not have this? Because I never want to create that for myself or anyone ever again. And so to me, that's something that comes up, is this like problem. How do we face that? How do we face that fear? How do we face that uncomfortable feeling? How do we face that limiting belief, obstacle, tragedy, difficulty, pain, all these things? We have
Hmm.
a choice. As you
Yeah.
famously say, we have agency. And so, as I say, for me, most of the time, there hasn't been a plan B. But even within myself, sometimes I went plan B. I'm like, oh yeah, that's why I don't go to plan B. Plan B sucks. I don't like plan B. Plan A is better. So there's all that comes up. And then the Jordan Peterson thing too is, I think, tied to all this for me. He talks about responsibility. And I love what people say, it's the ability to respond, which to me is resiliency and strength as
Hmm.
well. is he talks about basic. I don't know if he's quoting studies, but Jordan Peterson, I love dang near everything he says. It's very inspiring. The guy does a lot of research. Is he says that I think especially as men, I would agree it's for people. But I think he's talking about men when he says it. Is the more responsibility we have as men, the better we are for it. And to me, it's tied right into that. Jocko Willink says this. Someone brings a problem to him, and he says, "Good." Bring another good, and it's what we're talking about. Like whether it's fear or something else, it's I want more responsibility. I want more things that I can care and tend for. The more I do that, the more I feel this soul level innate, like primal urge to grow, be better, show up, and face more fear and grow more and be better, not for me. And that's the beauty of the thing. The more responsibility is responsibility for others, an animal, a child, a financial or emotional element of a partner, in a healthy way, whatever it is, a company, a client. That makes us better. So Jordan essentially says more responsibility is better. And I think a lot of us, in avoiding fear, uncomfortable things, can want to avoid responsibility as well, or feel like it's a burden. So I've had a pretty cool journey with that over the years as well. So that all came up.
That's really cool, man. Thank you for sharing that. I really agree with that. This has been a great conversation, man. Thanks so much for for diving into this. I just it's so neat the growth and the awareness that we can gain just by connecting, just by being open on shit that lights us up inside, things we're running from.
There we go.
Having somebody in your life that is a mentor for me that posits questions like that. That what's on the other side of that, and just the incredible growth that we can have just by being honest with ourselves and others about what's happening inside, and being open about that, and that gets right back to fear, man. That's why most of us don't do it. And so I'm just super excited to continue stepping into that, for us to continue to be able to share our adventures, our stories, the times that maybe we didn't show up how we wanted to, chose the plan B instead. But the learning that comes from that too, it's hilarious, and in such a neat way. And so just excited to hear too. I love hearing feedback that we get on the podcast, and I love people's shares on. I think hearing about fear would be really neat, and the things that people have overcome and stepped into, and the sheer beauty that came from that moment when looking back. I was really touched by sharing about your leukemia, and how reflecting back on that, as inconceivable as it was to you at that time, for this to be a positive thing. Like, you can concretely say it's one of the best things that's happened in your life, like, to this point.
Yeah, man.
Incredible.
Appreciate you saying that. Yeah, it makes me. I'm curious one day if you decide to share more of your story, because I have the same. I've said this a few times. I'm certain people will get immense value out of knowing what you went through if that time comes, for you to share publicly. And honestly, to tie it back home, I mean, we didn't even discuss it this whole time, but I just thought of this. Fear versus authenticity and vulnerability. Most of us are not authentic. We please, we mask, we do these things, we shapeshift, or we're not vulnerable because of fear. And so that's one of the greatest gifts of all this stuff too, facing that. You then are more authentic. You allow yourself healthy vulnerability. You get better relationships and connection. And at the end of the day, that's what life's about. And that's another thing from the elders. I watched a video this morning about elders being interviewed, and they almost all said the same thing. Like, I chase money too much. I chase material too much. the end of the day, it was about my partner, my family, my parents, my kids, my friends, my community, love, being healthy, physically
Hmm.
healthy. And it's like, I think the more we face the fear, the more we get all that. So,
I love it.
yeah, man.
Well,
Love you, dude. I
love you
love
too,
you.
man. I do.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you again, and
Yeah,
thank you
man. You
all
too.
for being here. And until next time, we'll do this again.